Okay guys, I found another one from 2011. The film is called The Thing, and it's yet another remake of that same story, The Thing. It's not the 1982, it's the 2011, and it has a 35% on the tomato meter and a 42% on the audience score. It is rotten. I'm going to agree it is rotten. I would say as a standalone horror film, it's passable. It's a little bit disgusting, a little bit scary, but nothing stand out. It's a forgettable horror film just as a standalone. But this is actually a prequel to the 1982 film, The Thing, as we can see here. There we have it, The Thing with Kurt Russell. It has a 84% certified fresh, a 92% on the audience score. Now, just as a little bit of history, the 1982 movie, The Thing, is a remake of the 1950s movie, The Thing. You know, the 1950s movie was okay if you were somebody of that generation. It was scary to you at the time. But this is my thing from 1982, people my age. This is the thing that they know, and it's a classic with Kurt Russell. It is one of John Carpenter's best. It is perhaps the best John Carpenter movie that he ever did. There's no disputing that. I don't think anybody out there is going to argue that. It's also listed as perhaps one of the best horror films of all time. And there's a little bit of argument on that, but again, most people would agree this is in the top 3. Okay, so it was probably a mistake to remake this a third time, and yet I say remake because while the 2011 film is not actually a remake, it's a prequel, it was kind of mismarketed and came across as a remake to most people in 2011, and to me as well. And when this came out on DVD, I saw it on its week of release, and I didn't know this was a prequel. I thought it was a straight up remake of the 1982 film. Again, that's a marketing fail. It really was. Because it wasn't until I actually watched the very end scene of this film that I suddenly realized this was a prequel to the 1982 film. It smoothly goes right into the events of the 1982 film, right into it. You could watch this and then watch the 82 film and get a seamless story. Not necessarily a good story, but a seamless one. And the producers of this 2011 version were very careful to set up everything that they possibly could. They did the research to make their Norwegian Antarctic camp match up with what was shown in the 1982 film. In every way, they made it match up that they possibly could, and they did a good job of that. It was lost on me, though, because I didn't realize it was a prequel until the very end of the film. Now, this is largely a failure because it had a lot of reshoots, and it started out, the director wanted to do something with just practical effects, and along the way, the studio forced him to put CGI over the top of those practical effects, and you can tell, and they forced him to change the story and cut a lot of explanation from later in the third act that would have made this film better. And so it's just in rotten territory because you already know what the thing is from the 1982 film, so it kind of fails to have the suspense of the original, and you would kind of know it would fail because remake or prequel, it wouldn't matter. You know what you're dealing with here. So this film would have to do quite a lot more above and beyond to get you to feel the suspense, and it didn't. And on top of that, the effects you see of what the thing does, how it takes people over and how it kills them, are very similar to the first one. Very similar. There's not a whole lot new. It's nearly as gross in a lot of ways, but it doesn't affect you the same way because the 1982 one's so well known. So it was probably a mistake to make a prequel or a remake at all, because no matter what you did, it was never going to capture the magic of, you know, seeing it in 1982 for the first time. So it was, to me, it was a mistake to do this. But, you know, 42% on the audience score, I think that's fair, because as a standalone horror, this is above the average standalone horror. There's more of a production value put into it. And if you don't know that this is part of the other movie, it's got its moments. You know, it's got its scary and gross moments. Now, don't think too hard about it, because the logic, it has a lot of logic fail in it in some places, so don't think too hard on it. But it's worth one watch. Without thinking too hard, maybe even drink a beer before you see it. But just know this is a prequel. and it just didn't have the proper marketing to let people know that. And I'm sure most people went into the theater not knowing that as well. So as a prequel, you might forgive it a little bit, and you might be a little bit more satisfied with how they put some detail in there for the fans of the 1982 film to make things match up properly, to almost explain mysteries of the 1982 film in a lot of ways. But not knowing that, you don't get that appreciation as a longtime fan. That's the experience I had with it. Wasn't until the very final scene that I'm like, oh wow, this is actually a prequel. Because it doesn't feel like it's set in 1982. Yes, there's nothing in there that says it's not. But just because you don't see cell phones, you are in Antarctica, so you're not supposed to see cell phones and whatnot. The flamethrowers are very reminiscent of the 1982 film. A lot of things, the clothing, it could work in a more modern film too, because this is Arctic gear. So again, yes, it's technically in 1982, that time period that the first film is in. But visually, you don't see that. There's nothing that makes you notice that. So it came as a shock to me that it was a prequel. I think that's a failure because they should have put something in there that clues you in that you're in the 80s. But you don't get that from the look of the film. It looks like it could be modern day. So almost like a trick there. Disappointing in a lot of ways because, if you had gone into this knowing it was a prequel, you would have felt disappointed. Standalone movie, you would have just thought it was a forgettable horror movie. Now let's go right into the audience reviews. Has a running time 1 hour 43 minutes. It doesn't feel too long. It feels like it's about the right amount. It would have been a little bit longer. There was some stuff cut out of it. So the final version, 1 hour 43 minutes. The ending, it tried to give you a little bit of a twist ending, but actually it gave you an ending that felt like maybe you had watched a straight-up murder. In the first film, it was ambiguous who would become the thing at the end. Kurt Russell and the other actor who were alive at the end, the other character, maybe one of them was the thing, maybe it wasn't. It was left in an ambiguous fashion. At the end of this, everybody except the female character played by Mary Elizabeth Weinstein, she is the only survivor. She's human, definitely at the end. But it's kind of shown that she may have just straight up murdered somebody else who was human at the end. You don't know for sure. Kind of a weird ending on that one. But anyway, 3 stars on the first review, November 15th, 2019, just from a month ago. Whoever made the decision to change the practical effects to CGI should be shipped off to a mental hospital. First off, I'll say that I give this 2 stars because it's an acceptable horror movie on its own. It's not offensively bad, but I'll agree with this review. It doesn't deserve 3 stars. I'll say 2 stars, and yeah, the CGI fails. They should have just stuck with the practical effects. Sometimes the CGI doesn't fail, but it doesn't add anything extra that the practical effects were doing on their own. And then at other times, it's just a straight up fail. They should have just left the practical effects in there. And they spent a lot of time and money and effort on those practical effects. And then some executives in the studio came along and forced them to put CGI over it. So wasted money, literally. They wasted money doing those practical effects. And you can see there's a couple of shots that just aren't passable. They just are a little off-putting. They should have stuck with the practical. But, I'll also say, largely, the CGI just didn't matter. It could have gone either way, CGI or practical, and the effect would have been the same. Anyway, let's move on. 3 stars, October 22nd. I wish The Thing 2011 didn't use the same name as The Thing 1982. If they would have differentiated it somehow, The Thing Discovery before The Thing but not that thing, I think it would have made it more clear that this movie is as it stands. This movie is all right. The Thing features the same basic storyline as The Thing, along with similar scare tactics, but even though this thing came almost 30 years after that thing, the CGI effects in The Thing look more fake than those, and yeah, they're saying that basically, even though this is 30 years later than the other one, the CGI looks a little worse than the practical effects in a lot of ways. Yes, that's true. Some of that can be excused because if you're going to go with effects at all on this creature, you're going to have to make it look similar to the one in 1982. because it is set in the same time frame. It's almost a companion to that movie. So I can kind of agree and disagree on that. I think there was a reason to make it look like the effects of the same movie, the 1982 movie. That's why prequels, sometimes it's just not a good idea. There's a lot of other reasons why prequels aren't good ideas, continuity errors being the number one reason. But yeah, that's the other problem, is that if you're going to make a prequel to something that's got sci-fi effects in it, yeah, it's always going to be tough, because just like the Star Trek movies, where you see like Star Trek, the original series, and you have your control panels from the late 60s, and then J.J. Abrams makes a 2009 version set on the same ship, and it's kind of tough, because you're kind of left, you want it to look modern, you want it to look good, but at the same time, you have to kind of make it go along in some fashion with the original look, otherwise it's kind of offensive. There's no winning that, and that's why a prequel with sci-fi and with creature effects, it was probably a mistake from the beginning. 1 star, October 7th, 2019. This film started out with an interesting premise by serving as an explanatory prequel to the events of the first film. However, this film was a complete disappointment. It took all the good concepts of the first film and ruined them. All the CGI special effects were unforgivably unreal looking, and the final version of the Thing and the ending battle looked so stupid. They constantly pointed out the details you were supposed to notice, or the original film allowed you to notice them on your own. Yeah, that's another flaw. Like, they set up things to be callbacks to the first film, and they did it in a very obvious manner to make sure you saw them, whereas it kind of clashes with the natural matter. You notice these details in natural ways before. They weren't like shoved in your face, and the callbacks are like shoved in your face a little too much. That's tough. It's tough doing a prequel. And not only a prequel, but one that seamlessly goes into the other one. It's tough when you've got 30 years between. 4 stars, September 1st, 2019. One of the reasons that the original can be a masterpiece is that it has some unsolved mysteries. I want those mysteries as it is, but this is a good movie, tried to represent a possible event that happened before the original movie. I felt that this movie pays respect to the original. Not so exciting as the original because it's so predictable. I already know what the Thing is, what will happen to the Norway team, and that they cannot destroy the Thing in the end. I could not remember who is who. Well, see, for me it didn't work like that because I wasn't aware this was a prequel, so I actually didn't know that they couldn't destroy the Thing in the end, because I was still thinking it was a remake. Now, if I had gone into this as a prequel, then yeah, it kind of sucks out all the energy out of it, doesn't it? Because at the beginning of the 1982 film, not only is the Thing alive and well, but it's in the form of a dog, and 1 or 2 or possibly 3 Norwegian characters are still alive at the end with a helicopter. So yeah, it kind of sucks out a lot of how it has to end. It takes away the suspense, doesn't it? Didn't work on me though, because I actually made the mistake of thinking it was a prequel, or made the mistake of thinking it was a remake. But I'll agree, if you knew, it was even worse. 3 stars, August 4th, 2019. It is an interesting what-if prequel. It's not really what if, because, again, you know how it has to end up. And I'll mention something else. There are a lot of things that don't add up in this. It is the Norwegian perspective. It's that Norwegian camp that shows up at the beginning, of the first movie. Now, some of these characters, they are Norwegian. They are actually Norwegian actors. We've seen them in other Hollywood productions, but they are Norwegian. And there are Americans mixed in. Now, it's convenient. They sometimes speak Norwegian and sometimes they speak English, and it depends on whether or not it's convenient for the plot to go forward. And sometimes it doesn't work, and it almost creates a plot hole in its own. That's a big problem. Just like I'll flat out say it, if it's a Norwegian Antarctic research station, I'm sorry, they're going to speak Norwegian. And even if an American character somehow shows up there, I'm sorry, they're largely not going to give a fuck, and they're going to continue to speak Norwegian. They'll have no mercy. I mean, this is a cultural difference that this movie just doesn't go into. There are cultures that will accommodate an American, and they'll go out of their way to speak English, but I'm sorry, in this they would not. They might for certain things, but largely they'll just continue on in Norwegian and they'll laugh about it to the American, and I would find that more believable. But no, the movie needs them to conveniently do Norwegian and English when it's convenient for the plot. That was a mistake. Half a star. August 2nd, 2019, a prequel to the 1982 John Carpenter classic that failed to achieve any goals. Bad special effects, bad acting, lost millions, and now the franchise is over. Oh, this didn't need to be a franchise. Not at all. Please, 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 don't anybody out there convince anybody in Hollywood this needs another movie. It doesn't. The 1982 film was perfect. It ended perfectly. It's considered one of the best horror movies out there because of the way it ended. We don't need to see it continue and get screwed up or further explained, and we don't need more prequels. Please don't. 3 stars, July 12th. Either it spends a lot of time trying to convince you it's a remake when it's a prequel to John Carpenter's The Thing, or they went out of their way to find actors that look closely enough to Kurt Russell, McCready, and Keith David Childs. Outside of that, overall, it will pass the time and have you decent time watching it. Yeah, it made that mistake too. Kurt Russell played McCready in the 1982 film, and Keith David played Childs. They are the two that are left at the end of that to wonder if, one of them's gonna turn into The Thing. It ended perfectly with those two alive at the end. This film makes the mistake of putting a character played by Joel Edgerton as the McCready type character, and it makes the mistake of putting a Nigerian actor who we've seen in a lot of other stuff, he's a good actor, into this as a kind of child's character, a child's, he's black, but he's not African American, but he is a black character who's they're attempting to put him in there to replace Childs in some way, like a callback to the 1982 film. That was a mistake because this is a prequel, so why are they trying to, do that kind of callback to the characters that are presumably alive, miles away at the American station? Why are they trying to replicate them in the Norway station? It's weird. They should have made up their mind. Make a prequel, put the stuff in there that belongs, fine, the set pieces, but to actually try to swap characters into there, that was a big mistake. I don't get why they did that. Half a star, June 26, 2019. Just watched the Carpenter one, 1982. I agree 100%. Just watched the John Carpenter 1982 version. If you haven't seen it by now, it's hard to believe you haven't, but if you haven't because you're young or whatever, watch that. You don't need to watch this one. Please don't watch this one. The first one is perfect. 3.5 stars, June 9th. This is actually a good movie if you take the time to understand what it's all about. Really. Okay? Whoever compared it to the Carpenter's version is just uninformed. Really. Were the directors uninformed too? But I'll continue. This is not a remake, but the prequel to Carpenter's 1982 movie, and completes superbly the story from the original 1951 black and white movie. If you watch this 2011 version and Carpenter's back-to-back, like I did, you will be up for a nice revelation. Everything lines up perfectly with the 1982 story. The effects are very well done, matching what you saw in the 1982. No, there's no revelation. The 1982 film starts off with how this one ends, but this one's not necessary. There's nothing, you don't get any information in this one that you need in the second one. I'm sorry, but you don't. The few mysteries that are solved, that are largely set piece type mysteries in the 1982 film, those don't need to be solved to make the plot any different in the second one. On contrary, watching the second one just removes the mystery element from those set piece parts that are supposed to be mysterious in the first film. It's like going back and making a prequel to any other film that has some kind of mysterious set piece, like having an axe in a wall where you can tell the axe was used to kill somebody or something and it's still sticking out in the wall. It's been there for a long time. Making a prequel to go back and just explain why that axe is there, that doesn't change the second one. It just takes away some of the mystery element. It takes away the part that was supposed to be in your imagination that was supposed to make the movie work in the 1982 film. So I completely disagree with that. This doesn't give you anything. It actually ruins it ruins the effectiveness of the 1982 film. So no, it's pointless. There's no reason for this. 4 stars, June 6, 2019. I saw John Carpenter's The Thing during its original theatrical run in 1982. Lucky you. I loved it then, I love it now. I think this film is at least as good as the original. It's creepy, original, and a lot of fun. Please do not miss this film. I disagree, and they have to be a little bit older than me because I wasn't quite old enough to see this in the film. I guess my parents could have taken me to it, but they probably wouldn't have taken me to a movie like that in 1982. I would have been 12. So, I kind of envy them that they got to see it in the theater when it was new. But aside from that, I think they're totally out to lunch. This is a 1 to 2 star movie at the max. 2.5 stars, May 13th. I was expecting this to be bad, but was pleasantly surprised. It's not good, I wouldn't go that far, but it's not bad either. The best parts of the movie are the post-credit scenes. They do a really good job of tying up the story as a lead-in to the original. The rest of the movie was serviceable. The effects weren't as good as I was hoping for, but the plot made up for that. Just like the original, it's a story about a shape-shifting alien who terrorizes a northern outpost. It's not that scary. Yeah, you know why it's not that scary? Because in the first movie, you didn't know exactly what the thing was, and it didn't just pop out and start attacking everybody. It kind of had a method. It wanted to slowly take over. It wanted to get, it wanted to make its way to civilization. In this movie, it has some stuff that makes no sense. The thing actually does illogical stuff for how smart it is. It just pops out and starts eating and attacking people when it didn't have to do that. It could have made its escape quite early in the film to civilization, but it just decided to illogically sabotage itself by doing the opposite type of thing early on in the film. In fact, there are 2 occasions in this film where this alien creature had the chance to just make it to civilization without anybody being the wiser and take over Earth or whatever, but it just sabotaged itself for the sake of the plot. And the characters also did illogical things. So it was a competition between the alien doing illogical things to sabotage itself and the actual characters doing illogical things that they wouldn't do in real life to sabotage themselves to make this plot work. So that kind of takes all the suspense out of it and the believability out of it. And for example, I made a note here. There's a helicopter crash in this film that's completely illogical. Okay, the helicopter's going to take off and it's going to take a character that is actually the thing. But we don't know that. But one of these characters on the helicopter has already been infected and they're already the creature in disguise. The helicopter's going to take them to civilization. What does the thing do? Does the thing actually just sit there and behave and just, wait for its ride to civilization? Nope. It just decides for no apparent reason to attack everybody in the helicopter and cause the crash of the helicopter. Completely illogical. And then on top of that, the part that makes this totally illogical is after this helicopter just kind of crashes behind a ridgeline, a snowy ridgeline, easily accessible by all the other characters at the Antarctic base by just a small hike over the ridgeline. Do they go and try to rescue anybody? Nope. They just look at it smoking over the horizon behind the ridgeline and just shrug their shoulders and write them off. Forget about it. No attempt at a rescue. No attempt at wondering who survived the crash. Just like, yeah, there's 3 characters out there on the helicopter. The helicopter just crashed behind a ridgeline. Whatever. Just leave them out there. Completely illogical. And also because of their just shrugging their shoulders and allowing no rescue of the helicopter or attempt at it at all, because of that, the plot goes forward and the alien, the thing comes back into camp and two things now, because now it's in the form of 2 people and furthers the plot to kill more people. Completely stupid. Doesn't make sense on any level. 3 stars, May 11th. Not as good as previous The Thing movie. Yeah, not as good, and 2 stars at the most. 4 stars, May 11th, 2019. I am so surprised by all the bad reviews for this film. I've seen it probably 2 times before. I just watched it again, and this movie is awesome because of the monsters. I found the monsters in this film to be scary as hell. I also like the ending, which left some room for hope. Well, I guess if you didn't see the first film and this was your first look at The Thing, then yeah, the creature effects might have been scary and more disgusting than suspenseful, but still scary in a horror type way. But you know, it's largely bad, this movie, because it fails on every level. And I'll bring up the very end scene where Mary Elizabeth Winstead's, if I'm pronouncing her name right, Winstead's character, she and another an American played by Joel Edgerton, they're the survivors at the end until she kills him. Now she suddenly turns on him and believes he's the thing, because apparently she believes that an earring that was in one earlobe of his is now in the other earlobe, or because she can't see the other side of him, it's just not in the earlobe anymore. So she thinks basically because he's not wearing his earring that he was wearing before, never mind that maybe it could have been pulled out of his ear, or he could have pulled it out, or it fell out, or whatever. But from a distance, from a few feet away, at night no less, she tells him, well, you know, your earring isn't in your ear anymore. So then she just barbecues him with a flamethrower. And it looks like he was innocent and that she just barbecued him. And the movie kind of looks like in post-production they put in some thing sound roar to the flamethrower burning him to kind of give you the impression, you know, maybe the directors decided that that was a little bit too evil, so they kind of put some kind of noise in there to kind of give you the idea that perhaps underneath the surface he was really the thing somehow. But no, she pretty much barbecued an innocent guy, and that was in the plot, and somehow they tried to change it in post-production. But it shows you that they were going to kind of make the main character, this played by Mary Elizabeth, they were going to make her kind of like a conflicted evil person at the end, but somehow it got changed in post-production. This movie was kind of a mess when you really dig beneath the surface. I say it's 2-star for being passable as a horror film, but a lot of horror films are worse than 2-star, and we've put up with that for decades now, and these films still make money. So as a passable horror film it is, but it's 2-star, and it's really quite a mess when you look into what they did with this thing. There was even a scene that they had to kind of paste over with special effects, because in another scene in the third act they had cut this scene short, and so there was another scene that didn't make sense. So it had like a dead body hanging there, and so they couldn't have that dead body hanging there in this alien ship because the scene that would explain why it was there was cut out from the movie. So they pasted over it with some really cheap blocky special effects stuff and made it look like some kind of magical effect from the spaceship that was just for some reason floating in the room, in this control room. And it was there just to cover up a mistake in the film because of something they cut out from before. And it just turned into a mess at the end, and very disappointing and messy, very messy in the production. 1-star, April 8th, 2019, miles away from the original in everything. Yeah, literally in the movie too, they're just miles away from the original 1982 film, literally in the movie. 4 stars, April 7th. I really enjoyed this movie. I'm not a movie snob though. I just like a good popcorn muncher. I enjoyed the special effects, admired the acting, and was engaged in the plot. The only issues I had with the film was the lack of explanation of what the thing is, like where did it come from, etc. Yeah, and let me just break in here and say I'll give you that explanation. That was part of the third act that was cut out of the film, that the studio forced the director to cut out. In that scene, it's explained that the thing is not actually the pilot of the alien ship. He never was. He's one of a menagerie of aliens that had been collected by the actual controllers of the alien ship, the real pilot species. And they even had some practical effect alien creature that was the pilot of that alien ship. The thing, the monster, the thing, was just like one of a series of imprisoned creatures on the ship that were imprisoned in these stasis-like pods. And when the ship crashed, they were released. You know, they were the thing was released from stasis in the ice. And that's what the thing was, and that was explained originally in the film until somebody in the production of this film, somebody in the production company decided that that needed to be cut out, and that was part of that previous part I told you about where the special effects were pasted over the body hanging there. And Yeah, so that's your explanation, but let's carry on. The only issues I had with the film was the lack of explanation of what the thing is, like where did it come from, etc. And second, I felt the ending was quite confusing. What happened to Kate, the whole Lars thing, and is the dog the only thing left? Yeah, it is a little confusing at the end because you can't tell. In the 1982 film, there's like a pilot of the helicopter and the dog on the ground, and perhaps somebody else. There's like two people in the helicopter that you see, one of them with the rifle and one of them piloting it. And yet, in this film, you don't know what happened to Kate. And so she's not shown in the 1982 one. So I guess you're just assuming that she's still back at the Norwegian base freezing or something. It's very confusing at the end. It's part of that chaos at the end in the production. They didn't quite explain all of that. 2 stars, April 4th. Has anyone ever seen the original one with James Arness as the Thing from the 1950s? It was one of the best. The script, although dated, offers terrific acting and the pace is just right. I've seen the original. I saw it when I was a little kid and they were still running it on independent TV stations back when we had UHF stations over the air. Yeah, in the original, the Thing was more like a Frankenstein type towering creature. You didn't get a good look at him. He was seen largely in silhouette, and he was electrocuted by a contraption in a tunnel at the end of the film, zapped by electricity and killed. He was like a humanoid type figure that like almost lurched around like Frankenstein. And the suspense of that film was that you never really got a good look at him, even when he died. So I'm just leaving that there. It's for its day, it was like a good horror film, but it wouldn't be considered anything today. But it's a different generation of what people expected in a horror movie back then, and back then it was perfectly good. 2.5 stars. February 18th, 2019. The good thing about the movie is how they leave it, how it all turned out to be the 1980s classic. Unfortunately, the movie turns out in a huge mess with laughable CGI and lazy script. Yeah, it's a huge mess, very chaotic at the end. 2 stars, February 12th. Since it adds nothing to the story, 2011's Thing can't hold a candle to the 82 classic. Yes, I totally agree with the 2 stars as well. This is really rotten compared to the 82 film in every way. 4 stars or 3.5 stars. Not as bad as I thought it would be. It wasn't ever going to come close to Carpenter's version, but it's still worth a watch. If you go into this knowing that it's obviously going to be more rotten than the 82 version, then it might be passable. It's just a weird kind of gross horror movie. 3.5 stars. The story of this movie is not that bad. The most common criticism I have of this film is the awful CGI that was covering the actual real practical effects. Yeah, it was obvious in a few places, and not only that, it was obvious that the CGI didn't actually make it better or worse. It just made it look a little more shiny and clear than it would have been with practical effects. It didn't, in a lot of ways, the CGI didn't even improve the parts in which it looked okay. It just was a waste of money to cover up the practical effects. And yeah, it's hard to say why that happened. Maybe somebody out there has a documentary on that, why it went so horribly wrong and chaotic at the end. But let me list off a couple of weird plot holes that stood out to me. I kind of noticed that they were trying to make Mary Elizabeth's character Kate. Her name is Kate. The character's name is Kate, but they're trying to make her into like an Ellen Ripley type character from Alien. It's very obvious. It's very obvious the way they have her deciding things, and then everybody's just ignoring her. But she's always recommending the logical right thing to do, and yet everybody else is just ignoring her completely and suffering for it. And it's obvious they're trying to make her into an Ellen Ripley character. And when you see her pick up a flamethrower, then that's complete. It's pretty obvious what they're trying to do. And the flamethrowers, a lot of them just show up out of nowhere. Like, it's convenient that somebody shows up with a flamethrower when they need to, and they're definitely callbacks to the 1982 film. I mean, think about it for a minute. The 1982 film featured flamethrowers. That was part of its charm, part of its style. And yet this movie just had to do a thing with flamethrowers. What are the odds that some other international base is also going to have all these flamethrowers running around, all the flamethrowers around where all the characters know how to use them and get them put on real quick and just run around very casually shooting things up with flamethrowers, burning their own base down in the process? I'm sorry, it's just like they're trying to do too much of a callback to 1982, and it's completely illogical. The flamethrower jams when it has to jam for the sake of the plot continuing, and that happened in the 1982 film. The flamethrower jammed at the wrong time, and it worked because we saw it there one time that happened. Now, again, in this movie, it does the same thing. The same exact thing. The flamethrower, on at least one occasion, jams at the perfectly wrong time to get everybody killed because the plot needs to unfold in that scene like it did in the 1982 film. Wow. It's just dumb and over the top there. Yeah, that's about it. There might be more flaws. In fact, there probably are, but no need. This thing is definitely rotten. I would say the 42% audience score is still fair because this 2-star worth watching is a horror movie. This is a better horror movie than a lot of other horror movies. We're just so used to bad ones that this one isn't that bad. But as a remake of the 1982, skip it. It's offensively bad. Just stick with Kurt Russell. It's far superior. Forget this one. Forget everybody involved with it. It's not even fun to watch it if you're drunk. You'll just probably fall asleep if you're drunk. So I'm going to see you again on the next episode of Rotten Reviews.